In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer, and I'm very grateful to welcome a new friend of mine, Reverend Gregory Johnson. Hello, Pastor Greg. How are you?
Great, Eric. Glad to be on your program, and it was fun to be up in Logan not too long ago for the big Pause convention or conference, and taking some of the speakers and some of the breakout sessions for what you're doing through the Pause Wellness Center up in that area to help people with mental health struggles and other tensions in life. So good work you're doing there.
I was so honored to have you there, and I'm glad that we were able to cross paths at a former function and get to know each other a little bit. I've been really excited learning about the efforts that you've made, and the work that you're doing. I admire you and respect what you're doing. So, will you share with our
mutual friend in family, Elder Paul Johnson, formerly of the 70 and the presidency of the 70, and now with I think the Sunday school leadership. But he and I have known each other for quite a number of years, and we affectionately refer to each other as cousin, with no knowledge of our genealogy, being in any kind of connection. But we do have the same last name, so he says cousin, I say cousin, and so it's so fun to meet you, finding out afterwards that you're related and that your mom is his sister.
That's right. Yeah. So I guess we're cousins as well that way. If Paul's calling you cousin, I should call you cousin Greg,
At least second cousin.
That's right. Second cousins. That's right. Yes. I like I said, I really admire hearing and learning about the things that you've been doing over the last number of years. Would you kind of introduce that to our listeners, the unique position that you're in with interfaith efforts and what your faith background is, and then we'll bring in the mental health stuff a little bit later.
Sure, glad to do that. I'm an evangelical pastor here in Utah, and I arrived in Utah in 1992, serving in the Ogden area at a place called Washington Heights Church. I was there for about 3 years, a little more than that, when some of the folks in our congregation started a new congregation up in Ogden Valley, which had never ever historically had a Protestant church there. There had been a longstanding Catholic presence and certainly an LDS presence in the valley, Ogden Valley, which is Liberty and Eden and Huntsville. And so they were starting the first ever Baptist church up in the valley. And they invited me to become their pastor. So in our world, we refer to things as sometimes being a church planter, where you plant a congregation and you lead it. And other times you are the founding pastor because the congregation has already begun to gather on their own, and now they seek out their first leader, their first pastor. So I became the founding pastor of Ogden Valley Baptist Church, and that church continues. And then I got invited to be down at a church in Orem, which is not uncommon, particularly in your earlier years as a pastor. You might get different experiences and different invitations to join staffs and have different responsibilities. But so I joined an evangelical free church, which is another Christian evangelical denomination. So in our world, denominationalism is not, it's not the end all. Evangelical Christian faith, and I try to explain this to folks, is the expression of people who are fully devoted to their personal relationship with Jesus Christ and believe strongly that the Bible is our rule of faith and our authority. So, and we want to share the good news of God's love through his son, Jesus Christ, who came, he lived, he died, he was crucified, he was resurrected. And through the gift of his sacrifice and through the gift of his grace, we can have a relationship with him that leads to eternal life. So evangelicals can be Baptists, they can be Lutherans, they can be Presbyterians, they can be Assemblies of God, they can be non-denominational. But what draws us together is that common core of doctrine and our passion to serve others and to share with others the good news of Jesus Christ. But my life took a little turn in 2001. My wife and I had been only married for, we got married in 98, so about 3 years into our marriage, we felt this draw to say, there's something unique about Utah and the evangelical LDS connections. There's been a lot of hostility in the relationship between evangelical Christians and LDS believers for a number of years. As you know, and for your audience sake, I was actually raised in the LDS church. My mom was a convert in 1970 when I was 4, and I ended up attending a Bible camp in Colorado Springs as a young 14-year-old kid. I was at that time very, you know, serious about my LDS faith and my young priesthood callings and things like that. They were very meaningful to me. But I experienced something at this Christian camp that really did set the course for me to ask bigger questions about, am I a Latter-day Saint because my mom joined the LDS church when I was 4? Do I know that this is a truer expression of Christianity than my friends who seem to have some things that I don't have? And I was really moved, particularly in the area of their personal relationship, which again is a distinctive. When my evangelical friends would pray, they would pray like Jesus was in the room with us, and I thought this is really kind of strange, and it's a little too intimate, a little too personal. It's not
Less
formal.
formal. Yeah.
Yeah, not sacred enough.
Mm-hmm.
I had learned to pray with a lot of these and thous and
Mm-hmm.
the sacred language of the King James Bible. So I was kind of put off by it. But by the end of the week, I was starting to think, well, maybe there's something to this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I became really intrigued by the idea of how denominations and churches that are governed by authorities and structure, how are they helpful and how are they not sometimes not helpful? And so as a young person, I decided I just wanted to be a Christian. I didn't want to be a Baptist or a Latter-day Saint. I just want to be a Christian. And if I would sincerely pursue that, even though I was fairly young, 14 and a half, I kind of felt like God would lead me or guide me to wherever he wanted me to be. And in time, that became more and more clear to me of being an evangelical. So, one of the burdens of my heart in the early 2000s was that many of the evangelical churches in Utah were perceived to be antagonists to each other. I did not see that as strongly as maybe some of our culture, but I warned our pastors that we have to be more visible and more tangible in our unity and our working together. So we started an organization called Standing Together with the idea of helping the evangelical churches, particularly along the Wasatch Front. And we are a big minority in the state of Utah. I mean, there's probably only about 2 to 3% of our state that would be active in an evangelical congregation from St. George up to Logan. So that's not a lot. Now, nationally, evangelicals have a very strong uh,
Mm-hmm.
demographic. Over 20% of our nation would identify as an evangelical, and we're a voting bloc in the political world and all that kind of stuff. But here in Utah, we're a vast religious minority in a vast
Mm-hmm.
religious majority culture. And the hostility and the things of the past where Latter-day Saints insulted evangelicals and vice versa, evangelicals insulted Latter-day Saints, and we use that C word, the cult word, and then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we were told we were apostates, and so
Mm-hmm.
kind of load those bombs towards each other. And at the beginning of my founding of Standing Together, I literally had a chance a few years earlier to meet Dr. Robert Millett at BYU, and on the same exact day with a guest speaker from Denver Theological Seminary on the corner of South Temple and Main Street. We were standing there, heading back to my car, and Jeffrey R. Holland was right in front of us, and so we engaged him. And so I would say that April 11th, 1997 was the day that changed my life, that I felt God was very clearly giving me a connection with one of the most knowledgeable and, as far as a writer goes, Robert Millett has written as many books
Yeah.
as the LDS author has. And then, of course, to meet someone like Elder Jeffrey Holland, who was dynamic and just engaging as a personality. And he invites me to come to his office and have lunch with him. And through him, I met President Hinckley and a number of other senior LDS leaders. And now, through our work of Standing Together, we work very actively with senior leaders in the LDS Church. We work with university students, bringing college university students from Southern California, Alabama, Virginia, Minnesota. They all come in for spring break. And we set up dialogues at the universities, at BYU, and then all the institutes at the different universities. And then we have a scholar track too. So we try to get professors and leaders. We had a formal dialogue that ended a number of years ago, but we still have that ongoing conversation. So we've been all about trying to build unity in the evangelical churches of Utah so that we could have a new paradigm of engagement. We say that in the past, Evangelicals and Latter Saints were a lot about debate and contention. And we'd
Mhm.
like to think that it's a better thing to be about dialogue and conversation. So we really have chosen to offer that. And I will tell you, over the last 10, 20 years, I think many evangelical churches in Utah that had more of a fortress mentality have begun to open up, are building relationships with their LDS friends and neighbors. The communities are getting stronger, even in very LDS communities like Utah County or Central Utah. The door is opening for not this hostility, not this contentiousness, but more of an openness. And I just had the privilege. I'll give you an example, and I'll wrap this up. But I just had the privilege of taking a friend of ours, he and his wife, to a contemporary Christian concert at the University of Utah, Kingsbury Hall. Her name is Ann Wilson. She's very well known among LDS people as well as evangelical people. She sings the wonderful song "My Jesus." So we asked Gary and his wife Elizabeth Little from the Orm Institute, who we knew the artist, and their daughters sang a lot of her music. So
Mhm.
when I found out she was coming to Utah, I said, Gary, can we buy some tickets and bring you guys along? And so we did. And then as a result of us buying the tickets for the concert, they bought the meal. So we all shared in the experience. And I said, Gary, I think more LDS people will be at this concert tonight than evangelicals. And he says, well, how can that be? Like there's more of you. I mean, this is one of your people. And I said, but you guys are really starting to enjoy K-Love and Air One and the evangelical audiences. So lo and behold, we probably ran into 5 or 6 couples that we knew from the area, but they kept running into one couple after another. One mom had brought her daughter and her 10 friends for a birthday party experience with teacher. And that kind of music is not traditionally
Right.
experienced in LDS culture.
Right.
What's happening, and one of the moms said this to me as we were talking, that Gary introduced me. She said, I'd much rather have my daughter here tonight than at a Taylor Swift concert or some other kind of secular concert. There's really good stuff here. I mean, there's
Yeah.
faith affirming, God affirming, Jesus affirming. And I think, what we can offer one another in that way is probably a net positive. And The Chosen has been another great example of
Hmm.
something that the
Absolutely.
LDS community and evangelicals and Catholics, and I mean, what Dallas Jenkins and his team have done have really brought a lot of people together to think about who Jesus is. And it's kind of, yes, we have our different communities, our different denominations, but we're kind of letting those things be a little less important so that we can focus in on that relationship with Jesus and see how that can be life-giving to us. So that's who I am, that's what I do, and I'm just privileged to be a part of this. It's can you turn that into a vocation? I didn't know if we could, but 23 years ago we started to do it, and we've been going strong. So I guess you can.
Well, yeah, I'm just amazed at what you've been able to do against the odds in so many ways. The efforts like you and what Dallas have done, as I'm sure that you hear voices that tried to tell you not to do those things, not to bring them together, um, because maybe the compromises to do them may seem less faithful or something less diligent to the foundation of your faith, when in reality I think they're a stronger expression of them. And it's just it's really inspiring. And I love that we're seeing that those relationships become more cooperative and more compassionate, and like you say, dialogue and conversation to seek to understand each other. I think it's fantastic.
Well, Bob and I had the privilege of meeting a man who actually coined the phrase, so I don't want to take credit for it. But Dr. Martin Marty of the University of Chicago, he's the one that phrased this phrase, convicted civility. The idea that you can be deeply convinced of your rightness, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to be rude or judgmental. You can still be civil. And Bob and I took that as our path because we felt that when I say Bob, I mean Robert Millett. We felt that at the beginning of our friendship, when we were literally first asked to go to a church up in Park City, Utah, because the guy knew that we were good friends, and he's like, "Well, how can a Latter-day Saint scholar and an evangelical pastor be such good buddies? We gotta explore this." So we were invited. We didn't promote ourselves. We weren't hitting the road or anything like that. We just got invited, and one thing led to another and another and another. But we used to always say there are lots of people in this world that really show their conviction, and they're pretty demonstrative about it. They're pretty in your face about it. They're unwavering. They just yell and scream and do that kind of thing. And then there are a lot of people in this world that are very civil, but they're not very convicted. They're very passive. All religions are equally good, equally true. They just don't want to get into any conflict. So we felt there are people that are very convicted but not very civil. There are people that are very civil but not very convicted. Why can't we be both convicted
Yeah.
and civil? And so I know, for example, that my friend Robert Miller would be thrilled if I came to him one day and said, "Hey, would you think about baptizing me back into the LDS church?" I don't think he would say no,
Right,
And
right.
he knows if ever there's a day that he feels like maybe he's needing to make a change in his life, and I know he would not say that he would, but if he would, I would be thrilled to
You'd
baptize
be
him. And
honored. Yeah.
but our agenda is not more important than God's agenda.
Right.
And see, that's how we put this into some kind of order. That I might have these desires for Bob, and Bob might have desires for me, but at the end of the day, there is a heavenly Father, a God above, who actually loves us both. And if in any way the LDS theology is off, he would want Bob Millett to know that. And if there's something that I'm missing by being an evangelical and not a Latter-day Saint, I believe he would want to guide me into that way. So now the hard thing is we have good people on both sides who are deeply convinced that the LDS church is the one true church upon the face of the earth. And we have evangelicals who say, "No way, Jose. It's not about your church. It's about your relationship with Jesus." And so we have disagreement. So we can either contest with each other and fight, or we can build relationships, explore common good, and at the end of the day, be willing to say, "I think you're wrong, but I still love you as my friend."
Mhm. I love that. There is a term that we use that's used in the mental health community, called that we talk a lot about in our curriculum here at Pause Wellness, and it's the concept of differentiation. And then the antithesis of differentiation is enmeshment. So enmeshment are unhealthy relationships where we're in each other's space in an unhealthy way, whereas differentiation is we see where our agency begins and ends and where someone else's agency begins and ends. And when you respect the agency of each other, you don't have to enmesh with each other, and you can respect each other and hold true to your own values and standards, and you can still have healthy relationships that way. There was a
Yeah,
there was a quote by President Dallin H. Oaks, and he said, it would be better if our young people would refrain from arguing over their conclusions, that they should be looking more to understand the context from where we're drawing our conclusions. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree with each other, but at least we can move the discussion away from arguing over disagreements to understanding each other. And then we
yeah.
retain the relationship that way. And I just find what you're doing to just really harness that principle so well. And I think that's what we need. I just think we need so much of that, especially as we bring in the topic of mental health.
Right,
When
right.
in the faith communities that we have, truth is so important to faith, to believers. And those statements of truth can be so binary, so not movable, not very flexible, that when someone has a complexity that they don't know what to do with, especially as it pertains to mental health, and
Yeah.
as it comes at a crossroads with their faith, they feel like there's no room within which to work.
Yeah.
And so, what have you learned in your opportunities in working with people from your congregations with their faith and their mental health to be of value to you? Why do you think that that's important to figure out?
It is because I think religion can be by its very nature, it can be a force for good, but it also can be a force for evil or bad. And we talk about, extremism or control. There are people that will use religious influence as an authoritarian type weapon almost and we do see in various groups with authoritarian leaders that do great harm to their people. We can see examples of that in the FLDS culture of war and jest. We can see that in the culture of a Jim Jones, who was known in the 70s to lead a mass suicide in South America of Christian people who let Jim Jones become their god, as
Hmm.
opposed to just being a spiritual leader. So we know that religion uh, taken to a wrong extreme can be
Hmm.
very, very much a bad influence and a sincere problem. We have religious wars that we know of. We've had Protestants and Catholics fighting in Northern Ireland for years, not so much now, but we certainly have Jewish and Arab battles. We have the fight now between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. So when you take your religion so to the extreme that it becomes, if you don't believe like us, we're going to kill you. that's that's not the force for good that I want to lean on in understanding the importance of religion. And so because of that, people become very critical. I mentioned that we had an interview that was posted in the Deseret News this last Saturday, and I just glanced at the 200 and some comments, just a few of them, and just the nasty,
Hmm.
snarky, reaction to, either I was a compromiser because I was daring to be friendly to the LDS community, or this Robert Millet was a compromiser because he's not standing up to this evangelical and telling him he's wrong. And there were a lot of anti-LDS comments, a lot of so people who kind of pull out their fangs against religion, I think they're concerned about some of that authoritarian structure. But on the other hand, let's talk about the value. And one of the things that I think I have been deeply persuaded in my life is that you can either come to the conclusion that this world was randomly put together and it's just one chaotic, amazing miracle that we can have human life. It just, with if the planet was just 1/nth of a degree closer to the sun, we'd all be burned up. And if it was 1/nth degree the other direction, we'd all be frozen. But we live on a planet that has oxygen and water and just beauty all around. And it's harder for me to believe that that's random chaos than that there is actually a designer, somebody that put this whole thing together. That's compelling to me as an argument to
Hmm.
believe that there is something, someone who put this together, who made this world, who put it into order. And then in the pursuit of that, whether or not for some people that would lead them to a different religion than I've chosen. I believe in the Christian faith. I believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I do believe that Jesus is unique and uniquely able to save human beings through what he did for us in his death and his burial and his resurrection. But in the process of being a pursuer of truth, I want to encourage people to not live a black and white world life, but to give themselves the freedom to explore, to ask questions, to deal with their doubts. I tell people regularly, there are days in my life when I look up at the heavens and I look at the stars at night and I go, how do I know there's a God up there? How do I know that I know that I know that when I die, there's going to be something more there? And there's a part of me that says I don't absolutely 100% empirically know that. But by faith and by reason, I've convinced myself that I do think there is a God. And I do think he has revealed himself in Jesus Christ. And I am confident that there will be a heaven waiting for me upon my death. Now, we'll all get to find out, one day
Hmm.
when we're
Yep.
back. But to live our lives where we are free to believe that there is someone in the we live in a natural world. There's an supernatural world. There's a supernatural world that allows human beings to pray, to meditate, to ask questions, to ponder, to seek help, to seek assistance, to seek guidance. What an incredible gift that is to mental health, to actually have the thought that my life is not going well. I have made some bad choices. I feel like I am very condemned and guilty and I'm a no good, terrible person. But I can pray to God and I can ask him for forgiveness and I can get a fresh start. Those things contribute to a healthy mental
Hmm.
outlook and a healthy way of processing our own choices and our own mistakes. And that is the message of the Christian faith. And other religions also have their paradigm of forgiveness and mercy and all that. But uniquely, I would say, as a Christian, again, that the idea of being a follower of God, to seek Him in His Word and through prayer and seeking to understand Him, actually gives us an advantage. When I was a young Christian, I was invited. Actually, I was a young pastor. I was invited to present Ukraine, but Soviet Union had just fallen. So I was there teaching at a seminary. And I've kind of lost my train of thought there. I got a little distracted. What was I going to say about that? Oh, that there were signs in Ukraine that were holdovers from the former Soviet Union. And my friends would tell me, oh, that sign has a picture of an old woman with a crutch and a child that she's going to church. And in the Ukrainian language, it said, religion is for old ladies and little children. Like real serious people would not take religion seriously. And I thought, what propaganda, what craziness. Because in fact, very intellectual people in this world are deeply persuaded that faith and reason can lead you to the existence of an all purposeful, all loving, amazing God. And this propaganda line that only old ladies and little children believe in God is just silliness. We have some of the brightest minds historically, some of the brightest minds, if you go over the last 2,000 years, have been from the religious community, from the Christian community, Eastern Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Protestantism, many in the LDS, very, very bright, leaders in the LDS Church. So bright people believe in God.
Hmm.
Very, very intellectual people believe in God. And there's an experience that we can have in that relationship. And again, my hat's off to the person who's an atheist who does not want to believe in God, who thinks it's more rational to believe that there is no existence of a higher power or divine being, and they live their life for whatever years they have, and they die, and they think it's all going to go black and just fade to black, and there's nothing more. But what a depressing way to live your life. That's my personal opinion, is that if I thought there was no hope beyond this life, if I thought there was no God who loved me and cared for me and had a plan for my life, I would be terrified. I would think, what's the point of our existence? Why do we even exist if there's nothing but 60, 70, 80 years of life? And some people the vast majority of people on this planet live a very poor life compared to those of us in America, in the North America community. We have many resources, but many, many people, 90% of this world, live in poverty. They live in very difficult situations around the world. And if this is all there is, what a terrible scenario for them. But if materialism is what we're holding on to as a, North American people, what an empty promise is material. Big house, big car, fancy stuff, and then you just die. So I believe that a force for good in this world is faith that is reasonable, not unreasonable faith, not
Right.
faith that leads you into dangerous conclusions and violent conclusions, because that's not the message
Right.
of the Bible or Christianity. We are to do good to our enemies. We're to love them. We're to care for them. We're to do our best to serve them. And I just think, of the choices that we can have, to choose to believe in God and experience that versus not, with all my mind, with all my heart, with all my soul, I choose to believe. And I think it brings a lot of peace and joy and happiness to my life.
There's a phrase that a way that faith is defined that Latter-day Saints really espouse to, and faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of things. And sometimes I feel like we forget that we think that the quest is to have a perfect knowledge of things, but maybe the not to have a perfect knowledge of things is the whole point. That maybe there's a pocket there that God can work his wonders within, because we're using our agency to choose to believe in something that we are not proving 100%.
Yeah, yeah,
That there's a power in that surrender. There's a power in that courage to make that choice. And if we, I'm sure you're well aware of the statistics of religiosity across the globe. that the trends are going down. We're seeing more and more people exodus from religion and faith in general. Um, and yet, more and more studies show that there is power that faith can bring in assisting for healing with mental health. And
Yes.
so these two statistical analyses are at a crossroads themselves. Um, Now we could debate forever on the chicken or the egg of does religion cause mental health concerns and vice versa, or is mental health there and religion exacerbates it, or something like that. But the studies are showing, these are scientific statistical analyses that
Yes.
show that faith is actually lending to, obviously faith in a healthy way, like you mentioned,
Yes.
is
Yes.
lending to healing and hope-filled approaches to mental health concerns. Have you been
Right.
able to see that with your work as well?
Yes, and we met through a mutual friend, Carrie Sheffield, who is a Christian woman, and she's written books, and she's a commentator on public national news because her arena is this area of faith and mental wellness, and so she's an outstanding example of somebody in the field, and she has those statistics and has used those to talk about, how through counseling and through therapy, many people are find they do discover health and mental balance in exploring the questions of faith, exploring the possibility of a divine being and whatnot. And yet, I think a high number, we'll just say, percentage-wise, of people in the therapeutic world, in the counseling community, are not people of faith. So they're struggling because these people are finding that talking about God, talking about faith is helpful and gives balance and gives some peace and contemplation. Uh, but it's being presented oftentimes by people who do not embrace that worldview of faith. And so we have found, and again, Carrie's an example of that if we will allow ourselves to explore, and basically I want to say that just a minute ago you were quoting a Bible verse, maybe not knowingly, but Hebrews 11:6 says just what you said, Eric, that without faith, it is impossible to please God, and without faith, it's impossible to please Him. For those who seek Him must seek Him with diligence, and He rewards those that seek Him. So God says, if everything were just so plain and obvious, and we all came with a book that said, push this code in, and you'll be able to know who God is, and everything will be straight and simple and easy. That wouldn't require any real trust. That wouldn't require any kind of hoping and longing to be satisfied. So I think God, in His revealed authoritative scripture, which what I call the Bible, tells us that I want you to seek me and I want you to trust me because I want our relationship to be real and I want your love for me to be authentic. So if again, if you're just a religious person and you just conform to a set of traditions and regulations, you go through the motions. That's
Mm-hmm.
not very inspiring. That's
Right.
not
It's not intentional.
it's not invigorating, and
Yeah.
people get away from that. I like the definition that Webster, we used to have a thing called the dictionary, and there was a guy named Webster. So the old dictionary used to say that religion is human beings' attempts to reach God. And I think Christianity is just the opposite. It's God's attempt to reach us.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that mental health is supported and encouraged and balanced by a healthy understanding that there is someone who loves me, who cares for me, who's willing to give direction and purpose to my life, and that seeking Him sometimes, and again, Paul the apostle says, we see through a glass dimly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear to us. How do we know all these things? How can we be sure? That faith is an element, but again, I love to use the term reasonable faith because somebody can
Reasonable.
say, "Come and worship me and wear a yellow robe," well, is that reasonable? Giving your loyalty to a human being and giving all your money and wearing a yellow robe and following him wherever he goes seems to lack historical significance and theological. So there are things that we should be able to discern. This is not a good thing. This is not a healthy thing. This is not leading me in a good way. And to step away from those religious impulses, even if there's some kind of charismatic quality to the person or some kind of experience that you have, but to put that to test and examine it. And then when you find a healthy sense of who you are in relationship to faith, in relationship to the idea of God, then you build on that, you grow that, you mature that. We would sometimes refer to people who are new in their faith as babies. They're just starting off. And Paul actually writes, or actually the writer of Hebrews does, that when we're young, we are drinking the pure milk of the word, and then later we eat the meat of the word. So
Hmm.
there is a kind of understanding that we take simple steps at the beginning of the process, and then as we grow, and again, examining those questions, dealing with our doubts. You're not a bad person. You're not a bad Christian. You're not a bad person of faith if you have questions. The psalmist in the Old Testament argues with God on a regular basis. God, this is not fair. God, why are you letting the enemies triumph? God, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to follow you. And I just am so grateful that God,
Hmm.
in a sacred text of Scripture, allows us to see the model of honest expression, of confusion, of doubt, of hesitation, of uncertainty. Which one of us hasn't been, if you put your trust in a religion, and that maybe one of the religious leaders abuses you, and that would just be devastating.
Yeah,
Now, that
absolutely.
mean that all religion is wrong and all faith is wrong, or does that mean that something horrible happened
Right.
that was a counterfeit, that was a false and corrupted view of that? And we have to seek healing, and we have to seek help and assistance from others. But we can come back to a place of trusting that just because I had a clergy or a person violate me or abuse me or manipulate me does not mean that there isn't a God, that the structure of the universe, that the order of the human body doesn't give public testimony that there is somebody out there. And when we have bad examples, or when we experience bad things at the hands of religious leaders, and I'm not being
Right.
simplistic when I say this. I think this is very serious. It deeply grieves me when religious leaders violate that relationship and do bad things to people in sexual ways or abusive ways or emotionally manipulative ways. I stand opposed to that. I will expose it wherever I see it. But it's not the end of your journey with God. It doesn't have to be, and you can still find healing and peace and joy, and and that sense of healing through
Hmm.
loving care of God. So
You know,
I've got what you're talking about.
I love that. I've shared with you and with our listeners about our own daughter's experience. I would say, if I were to kind of generalize it, I would say that my daughter, her mental health, her serious mental health condition was probably made worse by being a victim of an Orthodox culture that I had, in many ways, unknowingly and unintentionally imposed upon her to be raised
Yeah,
in my home.
yeah,
And
yeah,
uh, again, unintentionally, completely. My wife and I consider ourselves to be very open-minded and diverse thinking and trying to be as inclusive as we possibly can. But even so, just being raised in a Latter-day Saint institute teacher, I was serving as a bishop at the time. She as you mentioned, I think that she felt like she was one of those lemmings, and that there was no authenticity in her faith, and that because of that she was not seen as an individual, which then made probably a tendency for depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation to be much
yeah,
worse. And it wasn't until we were kind of had our faculties, awakened to the culture that she was having to endure, and that
yeah,
there were
right,
ways that we could adjust, still being authentic to our own faith, but providing her a more intentional, authentic approach to her own experience.
right.
And it did lead to her going away from God and going away from faith for quite some time. Um, but just like our friend Carrie Fisher, what she experienced was this kind of um, evacuation from faith, and then this because it was an authentic, intentional approach, a return to that faith. And it was amazing to watch, and knowing that I wasn't manipulating it or pushing it, that it became of her own choosing and her own agency eventually, because she felt she had the space to do so.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I don't know I don't know if you named her correctly. It's Carrie Sheffield, right? Is that what you
Yes.
called her?
Did I say,
I thought you said Carrie Fisher, which is
did I say that?
she was in Star Wars.
Not Carrie Fisher, Carrie Sheffield.
Carrie Sheffield. Okay, we can watch this back
Not
later.
Princess Leia. No, I'm referring to Princess, not Princess Leia, Princess Sheffield.
Yes, yes. But
Carrie, if you're listening, I apologize, but I'm a big Star Wars fan, so it's a compliment
there
if I did do
there you
that.
go. But I think it's interesting because every parent in the world, my mom used to say to me, with two other older brothers and an older sister. And again, we were in my younger years raised in the LDS Church. She said, Greg, I always thought that I had really come to terms with being a parent. And many times she was a single parent, or we had a stepfather for a period of time. And she said, because you were such a good kid, you were so easy to raise and to discipline and to, all that. You were very compliant, very willing, and that you just had that thing. But I took it upon myself to think that it was me, that I had finally figured out how to parent. And she would tell me later in life, no, each of our children are so unique and different in their personalities that some are hard because they push against the goad. They challenge everything. They have a streak of independence. Other children are more easy and compliant and whatever, however you want to describe that. And I think what all of us as parents, and we have had our challenges with our kids. We have four children, and they're all at home now, and we have three married and one that's in college. And I know I can't go back and redo errors in my parenting, my authority style, my disciplinary actions, whatever. But we're imperfect people, raising imperfect people, all trying to see the light, all trying to see the goodness of God. And we do some things really well, and we do some things just average, and we do some things not so good. And,
Mhm.
parents can blame themselves and kids can blame their parents. But at the end of the day, we all have to take those experiences that we've had in life, in our families, with our siblings, with our parents, with extended family, whether whether we were raised in a wealthy home or a poor home, or where some abuse took place or didn't take place. Every one of us at the end of the day has to come to terms with the reality of the good and the bad and the ugly of life. And again, to those that think they can kind of just carry those burdens all themselves
Mhm.
and just deal with it and not care. I know people like that, and they seem sincere. I'm not challenging that. I just don't think that's a way that I could live my life, because I would feel, no matter what, that I was a failure, at least sometimes. And I'm so grateful that I can go to God and say, Lord, I've messed up. I had an argument with my wife. I had an argument with my child. I didn't think well of somebody today. I spoke poorly of them. C.S. Lewis is an author that most LDS people know, and evangelicals, of course, know, and we love his writings, Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, these kind of books. But in Mere Christianity, I think he put it so well that I'd like to just refer to this. He said, at the end of every day, I have my daily prayer, and I try to ask God to forgive me of anything that I may have done poorly during the day. And I find that most of the time it's a relational failure, that I was short with somebody, that I said something off color, I was mad at somebody. It's not that I commit the great big sins of murder and worshiping a false god or anything like that, but it's the daily struggle to treat people nicely, to be
Mhm.
encouraging, to be kind, and that. So I do a lot of asking for God to forgive me for the way I treat people. And he said it made me think about something, that um, all of us, if you compare your life to a cellar, like a home with a cellar, that if you go quietly to the cellar and open the door of the cellar very quietly and flip on the switch, you might see that there are some rats in the cellar scurrying, to the darkness. But if you make a lot of noise and you come up to the door and under your feet and open the door and then make a lot of noise, then you're not going to see any rats because the rats are all hidden at that point. But he said, I'm a man that wants to believe that my cellar has no rats. But when I come to terms with my own fallenness, my own brokenness, I realize I've got some rats in my soul. And that if I live in denial and I try to tell myself that I'm great and I'm doing good and I'm, then I don't see the failure, but the failure is still there. And I think that again, true faith in God is the ability to look in a mirror and say, I am not the guy I want to be. Why do I keep coming up short with the way I love people and treat people and what my motivations are and the way I talk to people? Why do I keep coming up so short? But also being able then to take that next step and say, God, thank you that I'm not done yet, that I'm a person in
Hmm.
process, that I'm going to get better. You're going to give me the strength. You're going to give me the guidance. You're going to give me the ideas. And I'm going to really focus on this area and try to do better there. And again, having his strength to help us. So again, we keep coming back to the value of faith in God and what reasonable faith can lead us to in terms of healthy balance in our mind, in our heart, in our soul, and all of our parts as a human being.
I'm so glad you said that. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is that you know um, whether we're talking about issues with faith or issues with mental health or parenting, whatever it might be, the reality is that we all come up short in so many ways, and when we have to face that shortness, if we don't believe that there is room and anticipated opportunities for growth and learning that God has provided us, that this path truly is one that is iterative, that we build upon our previous experiences, our previous failures, and that
Yeah.
grace is offered to be able to do that, then we will lose hope. We will feel like there is no hope going forward. There is no light at the end of these darknesses that we experience. And but that really is the message of God, isn't it? It is that we can be one who receives grace, who extends grace, and who seeks grace. And that grace is so fully afforded to us if we want it. It's just sitting there for the
Yeah.
taking.
Absolutely, Eric. There's a passage in Romans chapter 4. Paul's letter to the Romans is kind of a theological instruction for the first 8 chapters. And in Romans chapter 4, he literally talks about our relation with God. And he said, our faith is reckoned as righteousness. This is literally what started the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther when he was reading in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, that the just shall live by faith. Well, in his world, the just shall live by good works and hard and a lot of effort, you know. And he was a monk, and he was doing. I mean, how much more difficult can it be as a Christian than to be a monk? All the rules, all the regulations, all the devotion, all the duty, and he was trying to live up to all those expectations. And he reads in Romans 1:17 that the just shall live by faith. And then Paul tells us in Romans 4 that to the one who works, his wage is due him. But to the one who does not work, but by faith is reckoned righteous. So he literally he kind of tells a little statement there in verses 1 through 4 that if you work for an employer and you get a paycheck 2 weeks every 2 weeks for what you've done for that employer, that's really not a gift. You earn that. A gift is not earned. A
Mhm.
gift is given freely, without charge, without expectation. You get a gift at Christmas morning. You don't get a gift that you expected to pay back. Oh, how much did this cost? It cost $50. Well, I'll pay you next Tuesday. That's not a gift. You get a gift when somebody says, I got this for you and it's free. And so Paul says, if you're the person that works and you get a paycheck, that's just being paid for your good work.
Mhm.
But to the
Mhm.
person who comes up short and doesn't even show up to work, but he gets paid nonetheless, which seems utterly unfair to us. Like you shouldn't get paid if you didn't go to work. But Paul's saying, but to the person who doesn't work but receives Christ's righteousness, he's paid in full. And that word it's a Greek word, logizomai, and it literally means to be reckoned or to be made righteous. So faith actually is more constructive to our righteous standing before God than all of our good works. And at least I believe that's what the Bible teaches. And so when religion is used to put this carrot out in front of you, try a little harder, try a little harder, and you never get it, you never achieve it. That's where I think that's the religion definition of our attempt to reach God. But in Christianity, God says, no, I'm not just always going to be ahead of you and you got to keep trying harder and harder, harder. I embrace you for who you are. I accept you for who you are, but I love you too much to let you remain as you are.
Yeah.
So through God's grace and love, he begins to draw us closer to him. And again, he tells the Corinthian people, we become like new people. And he uses the term new creations, that the old things start passing away and the new, like new desires, new hopes, new ways of acting, new behaviors. You think, I don't want to go to the bar anymore and get drunk all the time. There's no appeal to that anymore. I do want to serve and care for my fellow human being. I would like to do that. And so this person who was living selfishly and living just for themselves and hurting themselves, that finds God's truth in life, begins to live differently, not because they're trying so hard,
Right.
but because God has drawn them to himself. And that's again, it's not a crutch to admit that, that you need a that you need a crutch.
That's right. That's right.
People need crutches when their legs are broken. That's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom, to depend upon something that can help you until you get better, and then you don't need that crutch anymore.
Isn't that really kind of the message of the parable of the laborers, right? As we look at the parable of the laborers sometimes and we think, well, okay, it's about justice, it's about fairness. But it's really not. It's the confusion that those that were hired in the first hour, that those that were hired in the last hour got the same pay as them, and they're frustrated that there wasn't a differentiation between those two. And the message that Jesus is teaching us in that parable is I'm offering you what you need. It's not about who you are compared to the other person. It's I
Amen.
have all that you need. I get really nervous when we shy away from grace because we're afraid that we're going to entitle people to sinning.
Yeah.
If to me, the tragedy is if our efforts to do that, to avoid teaching grace because we're going to entitle sinning, that it
Yeah.
comes
Right.
at the expense of grace itself, that's
Mhm.
the tragedy. Because
Mhm.
we all need grace. It's impossible without it. We it's what we're talking about. It's why we're having this conversation about faith and mental health.
Yeah.
Mental health is so devastating. Mental illness is so devastating, but that but it's insurmountable if we think that we are that getting help is not something that we deserve.
Yeah.
If we
Yeah.
think that we can just do this on our own and
Yeah.
we don't deserve any grace or any help in that battle, all hope is lost. And to the
I would
depressed,
I'd say good luck because
yep.
it's not what I've seen to be the way to mental health, mental balance, to just try harder and harder and harder, particularly when we don't have the skills, we don't have the history, we don't have the loving affirmation of a kind family system or whatever it is, or a marriage system, and then we have to just kind of buck up and try a little harder and
Yeah.
double and no, that is a false thing. That again is religion is best effort. And I've used this phrase. In fact, I can honestly remember talking to your uncle about this. That sometimes people think that grace, G, if you look at this as an equation, grace plus W works equals salvation with God. That's kind of the mindset of a lot of people. You got to be good, you got to try your hardest, you got to, and then you have to trust him too, and you add those things together, and it gets you what you want. Whereas sometimes people think, particularly those of us who are into grace like we are, they think, well, you're just saying that grace equals S. There's no works involved. There's no
Mm,
W. Just
mm,
grace equals salvation, and you can live
mm.
any old way you want, and just be into this, being that. But don't worry about it because you've been saved, and you're going to heaven, and everything's fine. But actually, I think that grace equals salvation plus works.
Mhm.
And those good works come from
Yeah.
a person who has been saved, a person who has found God, who's experienced God. Now God's strength is in us, not to get us saved, but because we are already saved. We're already in a right relation with God that has all the blessings that will come from that. But now that's transformative. And
Yeah.
so the saved person is not working to be saved. He is
Right.
working because he is
Because
saved.
they're saved. Yes. Yeah, that makes
Yes.
so much sense to me. It is, if you, to me it's First John 4:19, right? We love him because he first loved us.
Right.
So our love for God is a result of discovering the love he's given us. It's what he offers us. So our efforts to show God that love, our works, so to speak, are because of our integrity to the love that we've discovered he has for us. It's an integrity thing. So we're not working to gain our salvation. We're working out of appreciation and gratitude for the
Amen.
salvation he gives us. And I
And
if
what a
that
difference.
can't, yeah, what a
Difference.
difference that makes to the soul who feels lost and feels without hope, you
Yeah.
know? It's like it's that phrase in the great hymn, I stand all amazed, confused at the grace that so fully he proffers me. Meaning
Uh-huh.
I know I don't deserve it. I'm confused that he gives it to me, but
Uh-huh.
man, he gives it, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes all the difference. Yeah. Yeah. And
Wow.
I know we're coming, we probably passed, I don't know how many minutes we've spent together, but
Oh, I could
uh,
talk hours with you about this stuff. It's so great.
well,
So,
I know we talked about this, but I had the privilege of meeting Elder Uchtdorf one time when he was in the First Presidency, and I gave him a copy of a book by a very well-known Christian pastor who recently passed away of pancreatic cancer, but his name is Tim Keller, very wonderful, godly pastor in New York, author, speaker. You can find him on YouTube, Tim Keller, Pastor Tim Keller, and he wrote a book called The Prodigal God. And that kind of strikes you at first, like, well, wait a minute, prodigal is kind of like a bad thing. And he's the kid that went off and spent his inheritance and defied his father and embarrassed his father and then found that he had lost everything. But actually, if you look up the word prodigal in the dictionary again, a prodigal is somebody who will empty his bank account, who will spare no expense,
mm,
is a spendthrift, who is willing to pay any price for something. So prodigal by its term, by its definition, can either be a negative or a positive. Because in
mhm,
God's case, he emptied the vault of heaven. He spared no expense. He brought his very best. He offered us his own beloved son to be to come down as a human being and to live and die and be crucified and resurrected. So God is in fact a prodigal because he spared no expense and he gave it all. He spent it all for you and I to have hope, joy, and love, to know him and to find eternal life, to find salvation. And in giving this book to Elder President Uchtdorf at the time, he told me that he read it and that he told me that he enjoyed it. And so later, I mean, that meeting was in 2011. In 2015, I rejoiced as I listened to his general conference talk about saved by grace. And that I would encourage all of your listeners to go back and find that. It's in April of 2015 General Conference. And Elder Uchtdorf, President Uchtdorf, really communicated some thoughts about grace that I thought were not only refreshing, but unique in LDS presentations sometimes. And so, I think the last 5 to 10 years, many Latter-day Saints are reading and experiencing friendships where grace is growing as a understanding, as a theological category and an understanding
yeah,
of how we are rightly related to God. Is it by our
yeah.
best effort or is it by His best effort? And then what a joy to find that peace, that mental health, that encouragement, that joy, and that purpose, that sense of purpose in your life. So
Well, thank you so much for your time. If our listeners are listening and they're going, now, what does this have to do with hearing the unheard in this podcast? My hope is that we can see that we are stronger together than we are divided,
yeah,
and that if we can have healthy conversations that are filled with love and hope and grace and goodness, that we're all trying to help each other, that there are people in pain, and there are ways to have dialogue that bring hope to multiple people, that we can have differentiation and also be convicted and strengthened by each other. And so I just thank you for the efforts that you're making to do that, for your willingness to come on and share your incredible faith with all of us. And I look forward to more partnerships with you going forward, my
Yeah.
friend.
I do as well, and I love what I've heard from you about your understanding of grace and how grace met you in your parenting struggles and in your life, and I just celebrate that with you, and I see no daylight between the way you're understanding it and the way I'm understanding it, and all the benefits, and other
Yeah.
than the fact that I'm depending upon natural light from my window and
Yeah, yeah.
I'm fading into darkness.
Yeah, that's
But
right. Our
it's
time
not a
is
condition
ending.
of the soul. It's just a condition of the sun setting.
That's
I
right.
could turn on the light, but I didn't do it beforehand. We had plenty of
Nah,
light.
no worries. This is great. I hope we can do this again. I just appreciate it. I know that you and I've got plans going forward, and I look forward to those adventures and just appreciate you. Will you please give your wife a hello from us as well? And
Yeah.
and thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time.
Excellent. Well, God bless, and thanks for having me on your program.
Thank you so much.